Voters in the Central African Republic cast their ballots in today's presidential election. We'll have the details. African governments are being encouraged to invest in agriculture. 2016 is around the corner. That means it's time for New Year resolutions. Africa 54 starts right now. Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Voting is underway in the Central African Republic in a much-delayed election that many hope will end nearly 3 years of violence between Christians and Muslims since a coup in 2013. Security has been tight for Wednesday's presidential and legislative election, which was most recently delayed from Sunday to deal with technical difficulties. UN peacekeepers are patrolling sensitive areas. 300 members of the armed forces are also on guard in the capital Bangui, and 1,800 police are standing watch in other areas of the country. More than 1.8 million people are expected to vote, choosing among some 30 presidential candidates and many others running for the legislature. Among the presidential candidates are former Prime Ministers Martin Ziguel and Anicet Georges de la Guelle, who are seen as the favorites. Now, for the latest on the elections in the CAR, VOA's Katarina Hoija joins me live by phone from Bangui. Good evening, Katarina.
Good evening.
Now, let's start with the concerns about security. There were fears. How has been the situation?
There were indeed fears that armed groups or other elements in the capital might disturb the vote, as we saw during the referendum when inhabitants in Pékin actually voted under heavy gunfire. Today, we have not seen any troubles, reported any troubles. People were able to access the polling stations in peace. We had peacekeepers from the UN mission here in the Central African Republic were posted at polling stations all over the city. So were police and gendarmerie from the national forces. Most people said that they were not afraid to vote. They came to the polling stations and waited for hours in line to be able to cast their vote in these elections that are seen as the country's first hope to return to stability and peace.
Yes, and we know that there have been technical difficulties. This is an election that has been held under very difficult circumstances. How can you describe the general conduct of the process?
Well, polling stations were supposed to open at 6 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Many voters were there already at 5 o'clock. Most polling stations did not open until 8 or 8:30 because of logistical problems. At one polling station near the city center, party representatives were not even allowed to get into the polling station. And at another polling station in the Muslim neighborhood, Pékin, people whose last name ended at N, M, or O could not vote for the first couple of hours. And this is in a neighborhood where a lot of people are named Mohammed. Other difficulties were, of course, that election workers were not properly trained and weren't sure how to conduct the vote. In other cases, voters weren't really sure how the voting process would go on, since this is a vote organized with a limited time frame.
Yeah, really some problems. Yeah. But there were also these other fears that the militia groups or some of the militant groups may not accept the results if they don't win. Are those fears still very, very rife in that country?
They are still there, especially if there are problems during the election process and if the votes are seen as not credible. We are still waiting to hear about the results that is expected in the coming days. And if some armed groups or other political candidates, maybe even political actors, are not happy with the votes, there might be some disturbances, but this is still a couple of days ahead.
So results, in a word, when do we expect them?
Well, as we know, the vote in Bangui has been going well. The problem is the villages and the towns outside of the capital, some that are only reachable by motorbike or boat, where the votes will take time to get into Bangui. Okay. I spoke to an election worker before who said that around the 2nd of January we might expect the preliminary results.
Okay, thank you very much, Katarina. VOA's Katarina Hoija reporting from Bangui. Not too far from Central African Republic, Burundi's President Pierre Nkurunziza threatened on Wednesday to fight any African Union peacekeepers imposed on his country. Mr. Nkurunziza's comments was his first public response to the AU's plan to deal with an escalating political crisis in the Central African nation. The African Union says it is ready to deploy 5,000 peacekeepers to protect civilians caught up in the months of violence. This would be the first time that the AU will invoke powers to intervene in a member state against its will. President Nkurunziza also reiterated the government's position that any opposition members who had participated in the failed coup in May should be barred from participating in the ongoing peace talks in Entebbe, Uganda. Now, Europe has faced a severe migration crisis this year as an estimated 1 million people, mostly Muslims, fled war in Syria and poverty in other countries of Africa and the Middle East. Another 3 million migrants and refugees expected in 2016. The mass migration has raised questions about the future of Europe and the ability of its countries to absorb the migrants. VOA's Luis Ramirez has more.
Migrants had been pouring into Europe for months, but these images of a drowned Syrian boy on a Turkish beach in September shocked the world and drew Western sympathy for those fleeing a worsening conflict in Syria. A gap in the fence between Serbia and Hungary saw thousands cross on a single day. Hungary, overwhelmed, put up a razor wire fence and in October closed its border. In Austria, the gateway to Western Europe, trains arriving from Hungary were met by applause. Young Austrian women welcomed the migrants and refugees with candy and cigarettes. This woman said Europe could not turn away these people and said questions about culture and assimilation are another discussion for another time.
I really don't know what the bigger picture is, but right now it's take care of the people, give them food, give them drink, give them shelter, and let them pass through.
Budapest's main train station was the focal point of the influx. Most there said their final destination was Germany or Sweden, where generous public assistance programs promised them a future.
Germany help people if they need to study, if they need to make a new life.
But signs of strain came quickly for Europe. Sweden introduced border controls. Skepticism grew even more after the terrorist attacks in Paris. 2 of the attackers had traveled to Europe undetected, posing as refugees. Germany's leader welcomed the migrants earlier, but that changed by year's end.
We want to, and we will, reduce the number of refugees.
2015 ended with discussions on beefing up the borders, but Europe has no comprehensive plan on dealing with this tide of humanity, a phenomenon that leaders say is a test for the region. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, London.
Well, since the December 2nd terrorist attacks in San Bernardino, California, U.S. President Barack Obama has spoken directly to American citizens on their concerns on terrorism and national security. VOA's Aru Pandey takes a look at the challenges Mr. Obama faces as his administration tackles the renewed threat.
May 2nd, 2011.
Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
One chapter in the fight against terrorism seemingly closed, only for another chapter to open for this president just 3 years later.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak to you about what the United States will do with our friends and allies to degrade and ultimately destroy the terrorist group known as ISIL.
Since that September 2014 speech outlining U.S. strategy against the Islamic State militant group, the Obama administration has worked to contain what the Rand Corporation's Seth Jones says is a growing threat.
They have expanded into Libya, Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and a number of other locations, about a dozen places. We see more jihadists today, fighters, levels of violence, and groups than we've seen historically.
Some say President Obama's use of drone and airstrikes, special forces, and increased vigilance at home to counter the threat, particularly since the December 2nd San Bernardino terrorist attacks, has not been enough.
The notion that we can confront ISIS without a more serious military strategy, that we can deal with Syria without a more serious military strategy, is, again, it's fanciful. If you say to yourself, I don't want to use military force, and therefore I'm doing everything I can without it, well, you've already removed one of your most important tools.
Jones says he's not calling for a ground invasion of Syria or Iraq, an option repeatedly rejected by Obama, but a more forward-leaning posture from day one.
There are obviously things that you could say, oh, if we had only done this or if we'd only done that, if we had, bombed Assad earlier, if we had stayed in Iraq longer. But I don't know that we would not still be facing a very difficult and very long-term challenge.
For President Obama, this challenge has manifested itself at home, where he has spent the days since the San Bernardino attack trying to reassure Americans they are safe, despite a terrorism threat he says is, quote, real and has evolved into a new phase involving self-radicalization. Aru Pandey, VOA News, the White House.
Well, now, outspoken Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump's recent call to ban Muslims from entering the United States has American Muslims reminding the candidate that they too will vote in the next election. Although many Americans ask after each terror attack why American Muslims are not condemning terrorists who kill innocent people, Faith Lapidus reports that this is not necessarily true.
We're a part of this community in America. We are a part of the fabric from the early days of American history.
The United States is home to about 7 million Muslims, and even on a weekday, hundreds of them come to pray at this mosque in Virginia, a short drive from the nation's capital. On Fridays, some 2,000 believers gather for community prayer, among them recent immigrants and first, second, and third generation Americans. For many of them, a series of recent terror attacks, organized or inspired by the Islamic State, have made being Muslim a challenge to their religion and their efforts to integrate into American society after the attacks of September 11th, 2001. Many Muslims who were born, grew up, and were educated in the United States feel a duty to fight the spread of radical ideas going under the guise of Islam. Members of the Islamic Center of Northern Virginia say they believe it's necessary to reach out to lonely and isolated people who are easily radicalized and become homegrown terrorists.
Being inclusive, having inclusive communities that bring the youth in and, having positive messages and making sure they have jobs and they have a role in the society versus having them live separately or isolationists or, being alone.
I do believe we need more voices from the Muslim community to show the solidarity and support for our religion that has been hijacked by a very wrong group of people. They do not represent Islam. They have nothing to do with Islam.
There are a certain group of people who are trying to hijack the religion for their own perverted purpose, and so our role is to make sure that the community in general and the nation in general knows about this.
Polls and studies over the past few years show that Muslims have been crucial in helping law enforcement find terror suspects in the United States. And a Pew survey found that roughly half of U.S. Muslims say their religious leaders are not speaking out enough against Islamic extremism.
The Muslim leaders have been quiet for a long time, and we feel that this is the time that we need to stand up and try to bring back our religion from the people who have hijacked, as it resonates more and more that we fail to do our duty.
The Islamic Center's leader says that all the mosque's prayers and services are webcast live and can be found on the center's website in an effort to educate people about Islam. For Anush Avitisian, I'm Faith Lapidus, VOA News.
Now, taking you back to the peace talks on Burundi taking place in Entebbe, Uganda, we're joined by Chris Igenyi of WBS TV. Chris, welcome to Africa 54.
Thanks.
Yes, just one question here. Give us a sense of what's happening there. What are where are the talks right now? On what are the issues?
Well, the key issues that the latest round of talks was launched on Monday at State House in Entebbe. That is the official home of the President of the Republic of Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni, and he's also the chief mediator appointed by the East African Community Summit earlier this year. Now, the relaunch happened that the warring parties were invited into State House to draw the agenda for the resumption of talks after the first attempt collapsed, and a new date was set for January the 6th, 2016, when the new round of talks will begin, and the venue was selected as Arusha in Tanzania. However, the talks seemed to run into a concrete wall almost immediately because at the relaunch, there were issues concerning the conditions that were set by the two parties, that is the government of Burundi and the rebels or the opposition, for that matter.
Yeah. So, Chris, we will follow up on this talks as days go by. Thanks a lot. Chris Igenyi is the news manager at WBS TV in Uganda. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com and tell us what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Now, coming up, African governments are encouraged to invest in agriculture. Stay with us.
I am Sheikh Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today, we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
Well, the push to see Africa grow its agriculture continued in 2015, with governments being encouraged to improve infrastructure and technology for farmers. They were also being urged to spur growth in agriculture and address the need to improve its transport and power infrastructure. The growth of Africa's middle class, combined with a fall in the prices of technology, has opened up opportunities for investment in farms across the continent. In Nigeria, the government wants to boost the country's agriculture sector to reduce reliance on crude oil exports, cut back on importation, and generate jobs. Adeniyi Bunmi, a plantain farmer, also offers plots for sale to aspiring farmers. Bunmi is passionate about farming, but says he faces challenges marketing his produce. The rough road between Lagos and his farm makes it hard to transport produce to clients in the mega city, a bumpy 2-hour drive away.
Why toiling for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, or 1 year before you get your yam, before you get the yam into the market? So people don't even want to invest. I would rather want to invest in a business that will bring the produce out so very fast. So apart from the image problem that the set of farmers have, another thing is the issue of fund. It requires a lot of capital.
Northern Uganda was once a land of horrors where the Lord's Resistance Army once roamed, stalked and killed for nearly 2 decades. Now the region is emerging as an agricultural goldmine, drawing in agribusiness investors. David Ojok now cultivates sunflower seed in Lira. He's one of about 70,000 farmers who grow the crop for cooking oil production under the Mukwano Outgrower Scheme.
We used to have a problem because of Connie, but he's now nowhere. He was a big problem to us, but now we work freely. We can work on our fields for long hours, sometimes until sunset. The panic that used to be there is no more. This has given us the opportunity to expand our fields and produce more.
In Lesotho, workers at the Highlands Trout Project breed fish for export to customers in Japan. The tiny South African country with no coastline is using its Katse Dam to run a fish farm project that wants to boost the country's economy and meet demand for trout abroad.
We have a good catchment area. We get low temperatures, and that's suitable for the growth of our product, which is rainbow trout. Also, pollution and other problems that you get with city life, you don't get them here. You don't get disturbances. The fish can live peacefully.
Kenyan farmers are experimenting with new low-cost, easy-to-use hydroponic system to grow a livestock fodder, which they say is helping them maximize output from their animals. Osanya is a farmer in Trans Nzoia County, 380 kilometers northwest of Kenya's capital, Nairobi. He grows barley using the technology for his dairy cows.
The animal is able to digest this stuff very fast, and the animal feels satisfied because it has got a balanced diet. Let me say that in quotes. And because of that, even the body, the frame of the animal, and even it's glossy. It's nice to see because it is well fed, it's satisfied.
Livestock farmers in southern Africa, however, have been hit hard by the ongoing drought, which has forced many to sell their stock or lose some of the animals on their farms. The government has granted emergency aid to farmers to help counter the effects of the drought. The El Nino weather pattern is threatening one of the farm sector's key crops, maize. Leon Masumbuka and his workers venture into a forest just outside Kinshasa, capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo, to harvest a batch of honey. 69-year-old Masumbuka was an engineer with the government for most of his working life until he switched to a career in apiculture 14 years ago to follow an interest in traditional methods of beekeeping.
We harvest honey the traditional way, which is what people here are used to, whereby we kill bees in order to get honey. But as we try to get better at it and improve the way we harvest honey, one needs proper equipment, but also to get training. We have a long way to go. The main challenge is finding skilled beekeepers.
Experts say that with sufficient investment, agriculture may become the real engine of growth and development for the continent. Thousands of participants recently attended the 7th Afri-Cities Summit in South Africa with a special focus on the future of African cities and how they will impact the 2063 African Union agenda. VOA's Khalil Gay reports from Johannesburg.
Afri-Cities, the biggest democratic gathering of local Africa, held its 7th summit in Johannesburg, South Africa. The theme was named Shaping the Future of Africa with the People, Africa's local government contribution to the Africa 2063 vision. The theme was proposed to the summit by the African Union, asking local leaders to reflect on the future of the continent, to ponder longer-term solutions. Where will the continent be 1 century after the creation of this movement of African unity?
African cities are not European cities, are not American cities, and should not be. And we want to do it by putting the finger on the reality of the daily life of the African people.
Ilongbasi explained that many African leaders believe that Africa is mainly rural. Not entirely true, he said. In fact, more African countries are urbanizing. Now the question is how cities will contribute to the implementation of the 2063 agenda.
The management of African cities is different from the management of European cities. That we are compelled to bridge two legitimacies, the legitimacy of the modern state and the legitimacy of the custom of Africa.
Participants looked at issues affecting urban and economic development in African cities through the different sessions led by distinguished experts. The recent terrorist attacks in Tunis, Paris and Bamako show that African cities are also vulnerable in nightclubs, stadiums, hotels. Ms. Aïda Mbodj, mayor of Bambey in Senegal, shares the important role local government can play in the fight against terrorism.
Populations need to be involved through local government. Locally elected people know they can monitor and report unusual behavior. Elected officials are in contact with mosques and markets. It's necessary to get them involved and let them play the first role. This inclusive approach can beat terrorism.
In parallel, the AfriCities exhibition brought more than 150 exhibitors from different sectors, with thousands of delegates and decision makers who took part in the summit. Khalil Gay for VOA News, Johannesburg.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. What are your resolutions for the new year? We'll be right back. Welcome back. Now, at midnight on Thursday, December 31st, Americans, like other people around the world, will usher in a brand new year on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Locals and visitors alike share with VOA some of their hopes and resolutions for 2016.
I hope that the world becomes a better place and my family becomes better too.
It just seems like everyone's so angry all the time, and we need to find peace again within ourselves.
Peace for all the world. My parents is back home in Afghanistan. I wish I can bring them here, or having a healthy life. Get better grades.
Travel more, work less. Get healthy, so spend more time walking and spending more time with family.
Get better at karate.
Lose a little bit of weight, gain some more muscle, and, become a better person.
Be healthy. Peace.
Well, thank you very much. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune into VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
Music is something that brings people together.
Music educates, it motivates, it's a bridge.
Music.
Ali.
On.
VOA.
I am Sheikh Sali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent.